Robert Lilligren. It's Monday, June 21st. This is our regularly scheduled meeting. Just before I call the meeting to order, just to remind folks that we are still operating under Governor Wulff's peacetime emergency, and the Metropolitan Council has determined it's not practical or prudent to conduct in-person committee meetings, and so we will meet by WebEx, and this will be recorded. Members of the public can monitor this meeting by going to the agenda online to view the live stream of the meeting. The video is embedded right on the website. If there are no questions, I will call this meeting to order and ask Michelle to please take attendance by rolls to ensure we have a quorum. Michelle, please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Here.
Cummings. Johnson. I see Councilmember Cummings. Johnson. Lee.
Here.
Lilligren.
Here.
Lindstrom.
Here.
Mousset. Vento.
Here.
Wulff.
Here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. We have a quorum. The first item on our agenda is our agenda. It's posted at the Met Council website. If there are no objections or changes, then we can move on to our business. Any objections or changes to the agenda? Hearing none, the next item on our agenda is our minutes from the June 7th regular committee meeting. Is there a motion, please?
Vento moves.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there a second?
Lindstrom seconds.
Thank you, council members. Any discussion? And I see that Councilmember Johnson has joined us. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings. Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Mousset. Vento.
Aye.
Wulff.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. That item is adopted, and we will move on in the agenda. And committee members, I will note that we have a fairly long agenda today, so you'll hope to get through it. There are several information items at the foot of the agenda. So but first, the business items. Our first business item is item 2021-158. It's the tax-based revitalization account funding recommendations for round one, and Marcus Martin will present. Welcome, Mr. Martin.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I am Marcus Martin. I am a senior planner in the Livable Communities Unit, and I will be talking about the tax-based revitalization account funding recommendations, the first round, that is. So thank you for putting this item on your agenda. Next slide, please. So we'll start out with a little bit of the statutory requirements. The statutory purpose of the tax-based revitalization account is to help clean up contamination for redevelopment projects that will improve the tax base and add jobs or affordable units to communities that participate in the LCA program. The account is also expected to provide the highest public benefits for costs incurred and consider joint funding from other partners. Next slide, please. So we received a number of applications this round. Our first call of applications, or excuse me, our first call for the applications this year was in February and early March. In May, we received 18 applications for projects shown here located in the cities shown in light blue on the map. So these projects are located in Brooklyn Center, Burnsville, Little Canada, Minneapolis, Plymouth, Roseville, St. Paul, and South St. Paul. And we received 3 seed applications, 3 investigation applications, and 9 cleanup applications. Or excuse me, 12 cleanup applications. All right, next slide, please. We offered 3.25 million and received 4.9 million in requests this funding cycle. The account is oversubscribed, and this is an important condition for imposing the funding limits. Next, please. So we'll start out with the projects that are recommended for funding. The following 2 seed projects are recommended for TBRA funding. The highest scoring projects are listed first. Grants are recommended for 1497th Street East in the amount of $37,400. 694 Minnehaha Avenue in the amount of $20,800. Next slide, please. The following 2 investigation projects are recommended for TBRA funding. Grants are recommended for the Hardman Triangle in the amount of $41,300 and 375 Selvey Avenue, the YWCA expansion, in the amount of $38,400. Next slide, please. And the following 9 cleanup projects are recommended for TBRA funding. Grants are recommended for 2301 California Street in the amount of $193,500. ADRA, $378,000. Harbor at Twin Lakes Senior Housing, $213,000. That's missing a 0 there, it looks like on our slide. Dundee Nursery Redevelopment, $456,300. 2025 West River Road, $384,100. West Methodist Rains, $373,800. Northeast Business Center, $74,700. Capstone 35, $421,600. And 1222 University Avenue for $174,600. Next slide, please. So when there is a higher demand for funds than the amount of funds available by statute, up to 50% can be awarded to a single community, and up to 75% can go to Minneapolis and St. Paul. Next slide. The amount recommended for the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul in this funding cycle is 60% of the total available. That is well below the 75% maximum. Thus, this statutory limit has been met. Next slide, please. The amount recommended for projects in the city of Minneapolis adds up to 50% of the total funding available. Thus, the single city statutory limit has also been met. Next slide, please. So now we get to the projects that are not recommended. It was a competitive funding cycle. 4 projects are either not recommended or not eligible for funding, and 1 project was withdrawn. So we're going to start with the projects on the left side of this screen. The Shelby Commons, that project scored high enough in the evaluation to be recommended for funding, but funding is not recommended because we reached the statutory funding limit for the city of Minneapolis. In the case of 550 West Lake Street, Phase 3, a close review of the environmental sampling data showed that that project didn't have enough cleanup costs to demonstrate a need for funding relative to the total development costs. So it didn't meet what we sometimes call our but-for test. I will note that additional funding is requested from other grantors, and that funding is pending. Looking at the projects on the right, 2 of the projects not recommended for funding didn't meet the required minimum score. So according to our grant criteria in the fund distribution plan, cleanup projects must have a score of at least 75 points higher out of 150 to be recommended for funding by staff. And similarly, investigation grants must have a score of 30 points, excuse me, or more. So looking at those in a little bit more detail, the Sears project, it showed a strong growth potential, but also a lower cleanup health risk and a lower density and a lower tax base increase relative to the other projects that requested funding. The Rice Street project, the project didn't demonstrate sufficient need for the environmental investigation or demonstrate likely future development for the project. So in this case, those projects did not meet the minimum score. And as I mentioned earlier, one project, this was a seed project, was withdrawn. Next slide, please. Shown here are the cumulative expected benefits to the region if the staff recommendation is approved. After redevelopment, gains are expected in the annual tax base, jobs, housing units, a considerable number of affordable housing units, as well as commercial and industrial space. Next, please. So in closing, the staff recommendation to this committee, as listed in the business item, is that the Metropolitan Council award 13 text-based revitalization account grants, as shown in Table 1 of the business item, and authorize its Community Development Division Director to execute the grant agreements on behalf of the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Committee members, any questions on that report? I see first Councilmember Lee, then Councilmember Chambliss. Councilmember Lee.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Marcus. I have probably a dumb question. Is there any year where this account is not oversubscribed? And then in that case, what happens? Thank you.
It is a very, council members, Councilmember Lee, Mr. Chair, it is a rare occurrence for that to happen. We did have that happen back after the last recession. So if you kind of remember back to that kind of 2008, 2009 period. And in that case, the funding was recommended to be used in the following year.
Councilmember Lee, any further questions?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further questions on the report, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yes, for Brooklyn Center, the Sears site that did not qualify due to the low tax base increase and the total amount. Was there any scoring factor besides the criteria that was mentioned in terms of low contamination, et cetera, that brought their points down? And also, the low tax base increase, is that factor a factor of potential tax revenue generated from development? If not, what do you mean by the increase for the low tax base?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, yes, in the Sears case, I'll start with kind of your last question first. The tax base is a projection, right, based on the difference in kind of where they are now and where they think it would be after all the cleanup is done and the construction is done. In this case, we also use it as a relative measure per grant dollar. So what we're looking for is that the Sears project asked for considerably more grant funding, and it didn't offer the same amount of increase as, say, some of the other even industrial projects that we received this round. You know, if you think of kind of the Burnsville project, that other Minneapolis project, those had a kind of a higher tax base relative to the request amount. There were some other factors. The density was the lowest density of all the projects that we looked at. That kind of has an impact somewhat on what we project as some of the transit benefits of the projects that we also look at. We also look at things like how people are managing stormwater, if they're using renewable energy. Those are things that they didn't really have much to say about in their application for that project. Did I miss one?
That explanation is sufficient. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Chambliss. Council members, any further questions on the report? Questions on the report?
Councilmember Cummings has her hand up.
Thank you, Michelle. Councilmember Cummings.
I believe you're on mute, Molly. No, you're not. Oh, there you are. Yes, you are.
Still can't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Councilmember Cummings.
And her mute button is off.
We weren't able to hear you doing roll call.
If it would be helpful, I'm glad to look at the chat if that's easier.
I'm sorry, Mr. Martin, what did you say?
Well, if there's a question that is easily typed into the chat, I'd be glad to look at that as well.
Molly, is that something that, Councilmember Cummings, is that something you can do? Type your question into the chat.
Look like she's affirming that.
So I can't see any of you at all. I'm getting very little data. So Michelle, I appreciate your help here.
Yeah, she's working on it right now.
Okay, sounds good.
Anybody else maybe have? Council member Atlas Ingebrigtsen has her hand up.
Cool. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, we recognize you while Councilmember Cummings is typing your question. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thanks, Chair. I just had a question about how or is there any kind of equity measure for communities? We know that with polluted environments, oftentimes they're more located often in communities who experience other types of disparities. Wondering if there was equity. You mentioned a number of factors, but I might have missed it. I was wondering if you mentioned equity. I think in the case of either a low income community or a community that is otherwise impacted greatly by pollutants. Thank you.
Councilmember Linnea, Atlas Ingebrigtsen, yes, we do look at some equity measures. In particular, we look at some geographic screening. We look for funding priorities, given priority to projects that are located in either an area of concentrated poverty or what there is also an environmental justice screening overlay that is based on data provided by the Pollution Control Agency. We also look at kind of the character of jobs that people are proposing on site. So we look at if those jobs are accessible to people to the extent that they know who the tenant is. In this cycle, a lot of the proposals were for projects where the tenant wasn't known yet at the time. We also look at some factors of equity related to kind of transportation access and how that service is, what that current service is now and how it'll be improved, and kind of access to kind of green space and those things if they're providing new elements like that in their project. So it touches on kind of a number of the criteria. We made an effort to really kind of look at equity not as its own category just by itself, but really throughout many of the criteria.
Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Any further questions?
No, thank you.
All right, thanks, Councilmember. And then Councilmember Cummings has put two great questions in the chat. I'll read them for people who might not have the chat function. So Councilmember Cummings asks, first, With the grant, how long is there to spend the money? She notes that 1222 has such a large gap with no other public funding requested. Do we set this money aside and wait for the request to be filled in? And then Councilmember Cummings' second question says also, the FTE job, the full-time equivalent job considered post-project and does not include jobs to develop the project. Is the FTE job considered post-project? Mr. Martin.
Council members, yes, thank you for the question. The grant terms are 3 years. So in a case where there is kind of a large gap between the recommended amount and the request, we do expect that applicants can come back and request additional funding. We had that situation in this cycle with the 2025 West River Road. So that is an example of that happening. In particular for the 122 University project, there is some aspects that they can tackle right away, which are dealing with maybe either they can focus on some of the exterior work with the testing for the soil vapor, additional soil vapor testing, or they can start doing some of the testing of the PCBs within the building. So there is some work that even with this lower amount, we imagine they could start right away if they choose to do so. I know there was a second question there regarding jobs.
Mr. Martin, it's whether is the full-time equivalent job considered post-project, and does not include jobs to develop the project?
That's correct. We focus on the long-term benefits of the grant, so we're focusing on the permanent jobs that will be on the sites after the cleanup and the redevelopment is done.
Well,
Thank
thanks.
you.
Yep, thank you, Councilmember. Next, further discussion or questions, Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Marcus, been reading a lot recently about the significant increase in building construction and material costs. And I'm wondering if you and cities and counties are seeing the same thing as it relates to these types of projects. Are there significant increase in the cost of doing this work? And if so, how that's going to impact us going forward with such requests and grants?
Council members, thank you for the question. Yes, I think that in this case, we did hear it more in particular, that is cost increases, particularly for cost of lumber and those types of aspects of the project. I have not heard it in terms of about that in terms of the particular cleanup costs themselves, which often involve, kind of environmental testing or excavation or disposal at landfill. Those costs have been steady as far as I've seen in the budgets that were provided to me. But I think that is a somewhat of a concern in terms of the overall development. It's just something that I think we all have to monitor and be mindful of.
Thank you. Councilmember Vento, any further questions? Hearing none, further questions on this report, Councilmember Johnson.
I'm just ready to make a motion, Mr. Chair.
Well, if there are no further questions, Mr. Martin has proposed a motion that we award the 13 tax-based revitalization grants and authorize the CDC director to execute the grants. Councilmember Johnson.
Mr. Chair, I would move staff's recommendations on the tax-based revitalization account funding recommendations.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there a second?
Second by Lee.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion. And then thank you, Mr. Martin. And Michelle, please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas-Ingebrigtsen.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Vento.
Aye.
Wulff.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. That item is adopted, and we'll move on to our second business item. It's item 2021-150.
Moses, aye.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who did I miss?
Muse.
Councilmember Muse, welcome. Michelle, I'm sure you got that.
Yes, I will add him. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So item 2021-150, City of Mendota Heights 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. So it'll be heard in Environment Committee as well. And to present today is Mr. Patrick Boylan. Mr. Boylan, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Lilligren. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm Patrick, and I am the Sector Representative for District 13, 14, 15, and 16 in the Local Planning Assistance Group and Community Development. I'd like to let the committee know that Mr. Tim Benetti, he's the City of Mendota Heights' Community Development Director, is in the audience. And as a quick thank you for all of his work, an excellent plan before us today, and really impressed with everything he's done, and just wanted to do a quick shout out thank you to him. Next slide, please. So the regional systems are before us here today. You notice that there's a multitude of freeways. This is a very close in to the core, just across the river from Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport and just south of the city of St. Paul. Interstate 35E, on the map, it shows Highway 110 that's been renamed to Highway 62, but Highway 494 and State Highway 55 are among the transportation elements. A number of regional trails, including the Big River Regional Trail, which I am fond of skating on. I don't live too far from Mendota Heights. I live in St. Paul, but also Lucky's and Lucky's 13 Pub and Axles are definitely decent places to go. Next slide, please. The designation for this particular city is suburban, and that's the community designation consistent with Thrive MSP 2040. Mendota Heights is located in the sort of north central portion of Dakota County. Next slide, please. Table 1, also in your staff report, shows that between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts the city will have 0 growth for population, but that represents 100 households. But that there will be an increase of 1,100 jobs in the city in the same time frame. Next slide, please. Table 2 from the staff report shown here illustrates a slight change in sanitary sewer forecasts of population, households, employment. The underlying figures are the changes in this table. Next slide, please. The table from the staff report illustrates the planned residential density in the suburban areas of the city. The overall density of guided residential land is expected between 5.3 and 7.9 units per acre. Communities with the suburban community designation under Thrive are expected to plan for forecasted growth of population and households and overall minimum density of at least 5 units per acre for new development and redevelopment. Mendota Heights is consistent with this policy. Next, please. This is existing land use map refers to figure 3 in the staff report. As you can see, there's the yellow area is the residential, single-family residential. Notable is the sizable purple area, which is just to the south of Highway 55 and north of 494. That's consistent with other places around Minneapolis-St. Paul for developing industrial areas and the approaches to and ends of the runways for Minneapolis-St. Paul, which is just across the River Valley at this point to the north and west. Next slide, please. The city's future land use is consistent with, very similar rather to the existing land use. There is some redevelopment, some infill that will happen in the city, but for the most part, you see a continuation of the strong single-family neighborhoods and the industrial areas off to the southwest of the city. Next slide, please. Proposed findings for you today are that the plan conforms to the Metropolitan System plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. Next slide, please. On Tuesday, Tuesday, June 22nd, tomorrow, the Environment Committee will present to the Environment Committee the sanitary sewer component of this for that review and approval. The full meeting of the Metropolitan Council will be on July 14th. Next slide, please. Proposed action before you today for this review is that the Metropolitan Council authorized the City of Mendota Heights to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, revise the city's forecast downward as shown in Table 1 of the attached review record, revise the city's affordable housing needs allocation for the 2021 to 2030 decade to 46 housing units, to advise the city to adopt the Mississippi River Critical corridor area, or MERCA, plan within 60 days after receiving final DNR approval, and submit a copy of the final adopted plan and evidence of adoption to the DNR, the Council, National Park Service within 10 days of the adoption. Next slide, please. Just as a reminder, Mr. Tim Benetti is in the audience. Should anyone have a question for him or he wishes to say something, and I'm available for your questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Wulff, for your report and for your work on this. Mr. Benetti, thanks for being here and for your excellent partnership. Any questions on that report, committee members? Questions? And I cannot see you all right now, so if I'm not calling on you, please just speak up. Hearing no questions, staff recommends a series of actions authorizing the Mendota Heights 2040 Comprehensive Plan to place it into effect. Is there a motion? Motion?
Wulff moves approval.
Second, Aagesen-Huebner.
Thank you, council members. Any discussion on the motion? Further discussion? Hearing none, thanks, Mr. Boylan. And Michelle, please call the roll on the motion.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Aagesen-Huebner.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Musset.
Aye.
Vento.
Aye.
Wulff.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. That item is adopted, and we'll move on to our third business item for tonight. It's 2020-151, another joint committees item. It's a 2040 comprehensive plan and comprehensive sewer plan for the city of Elko, Newmarket. And Mr. Boylan will stay with us and present on this. Mr. Boylan.
Yes, happy to do part 2 of 2 for you. I'd like to let the committee know that Renee Christensen and Haley Sevening, the planning staff at Elko Newmarket, are here. For a community of their size, they did great. Really impressed with their resourcefulness and their willingness to approach and get help. And it's a pleasure working with both of them over the last few months. For you today is a review of the City of Elko Newmarket's 2040 plan. Next slide, please. This map shows in figure 1 of the staff report identifies the location of regional system components within the City of Elko Newmarket. Along the top is a trail search corridor, is that spray can symbol of the search corridor. That is Scott County Highway 2. Just off of site of this map to the east is Interstate 35, and there's a portion of the city with recent annexations just adjacent to that. But the history is that these were 2 separate cities a number of years ago, 20 years ago, city of Elko and the city of Newmarket, and they've since joined. So you have 2 little distinct downtown areas. Next slide, please. Community designation from the staff report identifies the city as a rural center community designation consistent with Thrive MSP 2040. City of Elko Newmarket is located in the southeast corner of Scott County and is completely surrounded by Newmarket Township. Next slide, please. Also in your staff report shows the 2020 and 2040, the council forecast city will grow by 5,800 people, representing 2,400 households, and there'll be an increase of 310 jobs in the city in the same time frame. Next slide, please. Table 2 from the staff report illustrates a slight decrease in sanitary sewer forecast of population, households, and employment to the Empire Wastewater Treatment Plant. The underlined figures in this image in front of you illustrate the changes that are found also in my staff report. Next slide, please. Table 2 from the staff report illustrates the planned residential density in the rural centers area of the city. The overall density guided for residential land expected between 3.13 and 6.52 units per acre. Communities with a rural center designation under Thrive are expected to plan for forecasted population and household growth at average overall minimum densities of 3 to 5 units per acre for new development and redevelopment. Elko Newmarket's plan is consistent with this policy. Next slide, please. The city's existing land use map refers to figure 3 in the staff report. The existing land use in Newmarket are predominantly agricultural, which is over 52%, followed by 30% residential, while commercial industrial is 6%, and park and recreational uses are 10%. The farmland in southeast Scott County is productive, and the existing development still follows in incremental patterns established by the former standalone communities of Newmarket and Elko. Next slide, please. The city's planned land use. Again, this map will be amended shortly to include dotted areas, which are part of the corporate limits. That north-south is 35W to the near right side, and then the purple areas are part of an AOAR industrial area. Those have both been recently incorporated into the city. So continued planned land use includes development, capturing the market potential of the interchange at County Road 2 and Interstate 35. Continued low and medium density residential throughout the city into the future. Next slide, please. The proposed findings in front of us today are that the plan conforms to the Metropolitan system plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent local government units and affected jurisdictions. Next slide, please. And like the previous agenda item, this will be heard before the Environment Committee tomorrow, and then in early July or mid-July for the full council. Again, just a reminder that Renee Christensen and Haley Sevenson are here in the audience with us. Proposed action, next slide, please. Sorry. Authorize the city of Elko Market to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, to revise the city's sanitary sewer forecast downward as shown in table 2 of the Revitalization record, to advise the city to provide the council with the dates that 2 watersheds approved this the city's local water management plan and the date the city adopted the final local water management plan. If the final adopted local water management plan is different than the local water management plan incorporated in the plan, provide the council with the final adopted plan as well. And then to implement the advisory committee's review record for wastewater service, forecasts, and water supply. And I'm happy to answer any questions at this time.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Boylan, and also Ms. Christensen and Ms. Evanson for being here today and for your work and your partnership. Any questions on this report, committee members? Questions? Any questions? Hearing none, Mr. Boylan has recommended a series of actions to authorize the city of Elko Newmarket to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect. And is there a motion, Councilmember Wulff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would make the motion to approve the staff recommendation and also comment that Elko Newmarket is the home of Elko Speedway, a really fantastic town ball baseball field, and a whole host of very authentic dive bars, if that is your taste.
Firehouse Grill I've been to.
Right. I love
Probably not included in the dive.
Thank you, Councilmember
you pegged it, Wendy, perfectly.
Thank you, Councilmember, for the motion and the travelogue as well. Is there a second to the motion?
Second by Lee.
Is there a second? Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Any further discussion on the motion? Further discussion? Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Musse.
Aye.
Vento.
Aye.
Wulff.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, and that item is adopted. And I will just comment, I do love getting to know these communities better through these comprehensive plans. So we'll move on to our final business item for tonight, which is 2021-159. It's emergency housing vouchers and foster youth to independence program approvals. And Terri Smith is here to present. Ms. Smith, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm attempting to share my screen. Just full transparency, I did not get my PowerPoint in time. So I'm going to share my screen instead of Greg pulling it up. So.
Well, we're starting to see it.
Okay, let's see. So thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Terri Smith. I'm the director of the Council's Housing and Redevelopment Authority and here to talk to you today about 2 new voucher initiatives for the Metro HRA. The Metro HRA has 2 opportunities for additional vouchers. And so I'm going to be presenting on both of them, sharing some information about them and to gain your approval to accept those vouchers and enter into the necessary agreements. Both provide rent assistance to people experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. One is the Emergency Housing Voucher Program, and the other one is the Foster Youth to Independence Initiative. I'll first talk about the emergency housing vouchers. As you may have read or seen in the news or read somewhere, the American Rescue Plan of 2021 was signed by President Biden, and that included $5 billion for emergency housing vouchers. This resulted in the award of 70,000 emergency housing vouchers awarded to 700 public housing authorities across the country, including the Metro HRA. Here in our region, the Metro HRA is receiving 218 vouchers. Minneapolis Public Housing Authority is receiving 246. St. Paul PHA is receiving 157, and then Dakota County is receiving 50. And then smaller housing authorities around the state will receive a small allocation of these vouchers. Under the Minneapolis section, the Metro HRA and Minneapolis PHA are proposing to enter into a joint powers agreement to allow emergency housing voucher operation in each other's service area. So generally speaking, as you know, Metro HRA serves suburban communities and the Minneapolis PHA serves the city of Minneapolis. But for ease of administration and to allow for quick lease up of these, the business item is outlining and asking for your approval to enter into this joint powers agreement. There's a memorandum of understanding required with the continuums of care, and that's required to be executed by July 30th. We're in the process of working with our legal teams to develop an MOU. The emergency housing vouchers are limited to serving individuals and families who are homeless, at risk of homelessness, fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, or recently homeless. And the referrals for this program must come through the coordinated entry system. So the continuums of care around the region each have their own coordinated entry system, and that's a centralized process that coordinates intake, assessment, and referrals for people that are experiencing homelessness to get them connected to housing and services. The Metro HRA operates in 3 continuum of care regions. We will enter into an MOU with your approval and with the Hennepin County COC, the Ramsey County COC, and then suburban metro area continuum of care. And that SMAC, we refer to that as SMAC, and that continuum of care covers Anoka and Carver County, which are part of Metro HRA service area, as well as Dakota, Scott, and Washington counties. The emergency housing vouchers are supported with HUD standard fees. So we get a fee for every voucher that's under lease. That's the same as with the Housing Choice Voucher Program. But these vouchers also come with additional non-standard fees. This is the first time we've received this type of support for service funding that comes along with vouchers. We wish all the vouchers came with this money, but we get $3,500 per voucher, which totals $763,000. And you'll see this money will bring this into our budget at a future budget amendment. But this money will be used for security deposits, moving expenses, utility hookup charges, landlord incentives to encourage landlords to participate and accept one of these voucher holders in their rental unit. And then HUD is providing some financial incentives for quick lease up. So for every voucher we have under contract by November 1st, we get a $500 payment. And for every voucher that's under contract January 1st of 2022, we get $250 incentive bonus. And those fees will be included in a future budget amendment. There's also a unique component to these vouchers in that they sunset on September 30th of 2023 if they're not in use. So vouchers that are in use on that date remain in use for as long as the family or household remains eligible for the program. But as once families go off the program after September 30th, we cannot reissue the vouchers, so they sunset. Next program I'm going to talk about is the Foster Youth to Independence Initiative. Under this initiative, Congress dedicated $10 million to housing authorities that are willing to partner with public child welfare agencies in their region and service areas. This program provides rent assistance to eligible youth who have a prior involvement with the child protection system. In order to be eligible, the youth must be between the ages of 18 and 24 years of age. They must to have left foster care, or they will leave foster care within 90 days. And then they are need to be homeless or at risk of becoming homelessness starting at age 16. So it can go back to age 16. If they experienced a period of homelessness at that time, they can be eligible for one of these vouchers. Here again, we're required to enter into memorandums of understanding, but in this case, required with the public child welfare agencies within the Metro HRA service area. The child welfare agencies provide referral and support services to the youth, and then the Metro HRA provides the rent assistance. The Metro HRA can request 25 vouchers under this program, and then HUD allows that when 90% of them are leased, we can request an additional 25. There's no formal application process for this. It's simply an email request that we send to HUD, so we would get them pretty quickly. Another unique component of these foster youth to independence vouchers is they're limited to a 36-month period. So the youth can only receive them use them for 36 months. And one of the services that's provided by the Child Welfare Agency includes transition planning for after the 36-month period. And they start that transition planning pretty much right when the family or household gets the voucher. Funding for the Foster Youth to Independence program includes HUD standard fees for administration. We don't get any of the extra money for security deposits or anything like that. And the budget implication will eventually bring the money in through a budget amendment, but it's only 25 vouchers, so it's less impactful to the budget process, but will provide up to 50 vouchers for youth experiencing homelessness. So with that, Mr. Chair, the proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council approve participation in the Emergency Housing Voucher Program and authorize the Director of the Metropolitan Housing and Redevelopment Authority to negotiate and execute memorandums of understanding with Hennepin, Ramsey, and suburban metro area continuums of care. Number 2, to authorize the Director of the Community Development Division to negotiate and execute a joint powers agreement with the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority to allow the two agencies to operate in each other's service area specific to the emergency housing vouchers. And then 3, approve participation in the Foster Youth to Independence program and authorize the Director of the Metropolitan Housing and Redevelopment Authority to negotiate and execute memorandums of understanding with the public child welfare agencies within our service area. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Smith. And I just want to congratulate you and your team on your ever-expanding partnerships with other housing authorities and figuring out innovative ways to serve people, especially youth now throughout the region. So congratulations, and please pass our thanks on. Questions on that report? And committee members, I can't see anything right now. Thank you, Councilmember Chambliss.
I just want to ditto what Councilmember and Chair Littleman said about our ability to take this on and have a large number of vouchers, and especially in comparison to other providers in the region. It's something that I'm very proud of, and it's unfortunate that we had to have a big pandemic that made this situation worse. But I think this is an opportunity to show how we can be of service going forward, and hopefully be able to get funds to support and end homelessness in the region, especially for our youth.
Agree. Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion or questions? It looks like Councilmember Alice Ingebrigtsen has her hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if we could hear a little bit about the supports for youth. Who are the organizations outside of the county or city agencies, the municipal agencies? Who are the other organizations we're partnering with? And what are the hopes or opportunities for this to continue post this what I'm assuming is temporary federal support.
Yeah, thanks, Councilmember. Ms. Smith, do you have a
Thank-
response?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Those are the details that are being worked out in the Memorandum of Understanding with the Child Welfare Agency. So the actual Memorandum of Understanding that we will have will be with the County Child Protection agencies within the SMAC region. So actually with Anoka County and with Hennepin County. And then Hennepin County, for example, contracts with 6 service providers that they contract with, and I can get back to you on the actual names of the service providers, but they're, and so I'm sure that would be helpful for you, so I can follow up in an email with that information. I don't know that right offhand. But the services that will be provided will be to help them achieve success. And, you know, one of my concerns with this program, and we've had numerous conversations about it, because 36 months is not very long for a youth that has been working, you know, potentially their whole life in the foster care system and maybe experiencing homelessness. And so to become stabilized in the 36-month period to me is a bit concerning. It's the rule of these vouchers, so we don't have the discretion to change that rule, which is why I wanted to hear specifically about the transition planning. And we heard from the Child Welfare Agency that their, you know, transition planning starts immediately when they get the voucher to help them set them up for success once the voucher term expires. The other thing is important to note is there's a family unification program that the Metro HRA already operates in partnership with the Anoka County Child Protection System. Under that program, we don't currently serve youth, but there's an opportunity, there's funding in this year's budget for additional funding under that program. And so if an offer comes through, we certainly will apply for additional vouchers to continue to serve the youth population.
Thanks, Ms. Smith. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, any further questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Smith. I think that information would be great, and I share your concern and understand the need to work out the devil's in the details always, or the opportunities in the details, like that better. But I do think, things that I wonder about is, organizations, well, because we have some great organizations in the metro area. But I also know that there's been great challenges about capacity and maybe not so much on the organizations that are supporting youth end, but more on the housing opportunity. So housing spaces willing and open or available or accessible to this population that is safe. And so that would just be information that would be, interesting to hear, but just know you're supported in doing the question asking you need to do. And if you need feedback or input from us, please reach out.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further questions or discussion on this report? First, Councilmember Cummings, then Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Smith, for this presentation. It's great to have the opportunity, and hopefully we'll be able to use them in an effective way. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about landlord incentives, both what we currently offer, and are there additional ones that we can offer to hopefully kick this program? 36 months is not a long period of time, as we all know. So I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit more about the incentives that we might be able to use.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Cummings, yes, we'd love to at some point figure out a way to get a pot of money to provide these types of incentives and support for security deposits, et cetera, for our broader voucher population. We do not have it. We do have a pool of funds that we've used for our mainstream voucher program. So that's the partnership with the Metro Transit Homeless Action Team. And we dedicated up to $3,000 per family to use for moving expenses, landlord incentives, and those types of things. We also, an eligible use of some of the COVID funding that we've received because of COVID, some of the additional administration dollars could be used for landlord incentives. And so what we did was we provided financial incentives to landlords that agreed to rent to a voucher holder for the first time. And so it was a one-time payment and the Metro HRA outreach team was providing housing search assistance and has lots of connections with landlords. Under the emergency housing vouchers, the service providers through the continuums of care will be doing the actual housing search, but the Metro HRA will use some of this funding to provide financial incentives for landlords that are willing to take a voucher holder.
A quick follow-up. Thank you for that. What kind of success has there been with these incentives?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Cummings, it's pretty new. We've provided a little bit of it with the mainstream voucher programs in the last couple of years, but we more so did more of that during COVID to help get people connected to housing. I'd have to check with my team to find out exactly how many landlord incentives, and I see Stephanie's on, she may even know the answer, but otherwise I can follow up with you to find out how many landlords we've recruited with the landlord incentive fees.
Thank you.
Ms. Smith, did you want to turn to Stephanie to see if she has a response? Or?
Stephanie, do you happen to know the answer to that question?
I do not, but don't you worry, I'm diligently looking as we speak.
Okay. We'll get back to you, council members.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions on this report, Councilmember Lindstrom?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And just continuing the theme here of tight timelines, you mentioned that I think it's September or 2023 is when if the vouchers for the emergency housing, if they're not used, then we need to turn them back or they sunset. And understanding the challenge we have with folks that have a voucher actually successfully finding a place to live at 50-60% or so, and I imagine there's additional challenges with homeless or at risk of being homeless population. Does that timeline give you heartburn at all, the 2023 sunset date? And do you imagine that the success rate would be kind of the same, 50-60%?
Ms. Smith.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Lindstrom, yes, it gives me heartburn. This is the first time we've had vouchers that sunset or have an end date to them. And that could change though. I mean, Congress could take action to change that rule. And so I cross my fingers that might happen. I think what gives me more heartburn in the immediate future is, the quick lease up times, trying to, we have 218 vouchers that we want to get leased up very, very quickly. And that takes a considerable amount of staff capacity. So we're in the process of hiring 2 people right now to help us so we can hit the ground running and help get the vouchers under use. The vouchers, one of the requirements for the emergency housing vouchers is that housing search assistance is provided. So the service providers will be providing housing search assistance. Metro HRA staff will assist with that process for hard to house populations. So people that the service providers are having difficulty getting placed into housing. Our outreach team is really, really good at it because they do it every day, but we don't have the capacity to do housing search for 218, voucher holders. So we're going to sort of work together. The other thing that worries me a bit is, we'll be flooding the market with these voucher holders. Minneapolis got 246, St. Paul got 157, we got 218. So that's, they're not all going to get issued a voucher tomorrow, but, that's a lot of people out flooding the rental market looking for housing. And so people that will struggle the most will be the ones that have high barriers, which is where the financial incentives and the security deposits and those things will assist with that effort.
Thank you. Councilmember Lindstrom, further questions?
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions or discussion on this report?
Chair Lilligren, I'd like to make a motion to approve this.
Please. Thank you. Councilmember Chambliss makes a motion to approve.
Wulff seconds.
And what Councilmember Wulff seconds. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Seeing none, again, thanks, Terry, to you and your team. And Michelle, please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Busse,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wulff.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. That motion carries. And we will move on. We have finished our business items for today, and we will move on to our information items. And committee members and staff, I'll just let you know, I think most people know my computer does not get along with Cisco WebEx in general, and it looks like they may have updated the platform a bit, and it's even worse now. So in general, I can't see you. I can't even see your names, but I can hear you. But for our next item, which is the Land Use Advisory Committee report, I will turn this over to Councilmember Wulff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You can go ahead to the next slide. So the LUAC currently has a vacancy in District 15. Councilmember Vince Workman from Burnsville resigned because he just wasn't able to attend the meetings. And we had put out advertising for people to apply, and nobody did. But I spoke with Rosemount Mayor Bill Drosty, and he is willing to put in an application and finish out Vince's term. It's not something that that's very easy to just put out to somebody who's never done it before, because all of the training on how things work have already happened. So having Bill Drosty come back, having previously been a member of LUAC, he already knows how things work, so that should be a seamless change. We're just waiting on the paperwork and approval of the chair once the paperwork gets done. Next slide, please. So the update is going all the way back to last November. We decided to do twice a year instead of 4 times a year, and just because there's not that many meetings. So hopefully this works out for you guys to have twice a year updates. Way back in November of 20, we talked about the SEED program, and the group was generally supportive of continuing the program. We talked about the Livable Communities Act scoring criteria, and it was that very high level overview that we got last fall before we got into the details. The group was very supportive of getting rid of the innovation and catalytic development criteria, as was the council. But they didn't get to weigh in on the details because of the timing of the information. The economic value atlas introduction was a really interesting conversation, because you don't usually hear a lot of really, really strong opinions from the group, but they were very, very adamant that they didn't think we needed to go forward with the economic value atlas project. They felt that staff time could be used on other things that would be more beneficial to the region than doing this. They saw it as somewhat redundant to other information that the council provides and other sources provide. So they gave that very strong recommendation, but we're still going forward with the project apparently. And we continue to work on the committee work plan. We're constantly evaluating and updating whether we need to add or remove things from the work plan. Next slide, please. So we used the entire January meeting to have a ULI panel similar to what the council had at a committee of the whole, and used the entire time because we felt like it was a valuable conversation and good information for the committee. A couple of the big themes that came out of there were talking about market trends. Like I said, this is back in January, but they were talking about less demand for office space and possible reuse issues with that office space, and that some of that depends on the existing debt levels for the people who own the office space that may limit what things they can do for reuse because they have to make the money work. That we were already seeing a trend towards online shopping, such as with how Best Buy redesigned their stores to be more towards online shopping, and that the pandemic simply accelerated that trend. They talked about high lumber prices, and a big part of the conversation was talking about pre-development costs, long timelines, and the massive amount of risk that developers take on when they're trying to get multifamily or commercial projects through the development pipeline, because you don't know when you're putting all this money into a project whether it's going to make it across the finish line at the end, particularly with affordable housing multifamily. Next slide, please. In March, they had the same comp plan composite presentation that we had, and talked about the travel behavior inventory and more stuff about the work plan. Next slide, please. And got an update on the regional travel demand management study scope of work, similar to what the council has received, and an update on green space and the climate action plan. These were all presentations. There was not any huge discussion or items that came up of particular importance related to any of these. And that's been one of the challenges with LUAC, is finding things that the committee can discuss where they'll have a real impact on what the council does. It ends up being a lot of information items, and some of the members would like to see more items where they're actually voting on something and making a decision and having an impact on the council's processes. And that's all I have. Is there any questions?
Thank you, Councilmember Wulff, and thanks for your work on this, and especially for your work recruiting a replacement member. That is never easy, and it sounds like you got a great one. And maybe I'll start, Councilmember, with questions, and then look to the rest of the committee. But related to your last comment, which I think is a fascinating one, about having more pithy or items that can be acted on that can influence what we're doing. Were there recommendations on how best to do that, or that came from the committee?
There hasn't been anything specific that they have said, let's make a decision on this. It's more use our expertise and have us winnow things down for you, not just tell us about stuff. And that's been an ongoing issue for a long time. And the one thing where they really did have an opinion, like I said, with the economic value atlas, it's happening anyway, even though it was resoundingly disapproved by the group as something that wasn't necessary or was redundant.
Thank you. Thanks. Further questions for Councilmember Wulff? And again, please speak up if you have. Further questions, committee members?
My dog is barking.
Right, the aptly named Councilmember Wulff.
But if anybody thinks of anything, I'm happy to answer questions later. And I was just trying to be succinct since we do have a long agenda.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And again, for your work and for the report. We look forward to future reports. We'll move on then to our next information item, which is the 2022 preliminary community development operating budget. And Heather Aagesen-Huebner is here to present. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you, Chair. Committee members, my name is Heather Aagesen-Huebner. I'm the Finance Director for Community Development and Metropolitan Transportation Services. And could you go to the next slide, please? So this is, our second in a long series of budget conversations that we're going to have this year. Today, we're going to focus on kind of a regional economic snapshot, some performance that we've been able to do in kind of 20 and 21. And that's really implementing the work plan that you've helped adopt. And then we'll walk through some budget charts so you have a good understanding of where our preliminary budget is set and where the budget has some development work yet to be done. You'll also see that there's a long, just about every month has got a holding place, TBD for targeted topics. There's a list of those targeted topics we'll come back to at the end of the presentation. And sometimes those topics have natural groupings. So we'll just, we'll clarify exactly which month we're going to come back with those topics kind of at the wrap up of each of these meetings. Next slide, please. All right, so this is a slide we've talked about for a little over a year now, and this was your direction to us about how you want the budget framed. You know, so it's looking at our regional role, you know, providing data where we have it, making sure that we're focusing on all of the Thrive indicators, the general economy, how we partner with different organizations, how we leverage money, and then keeping an eye on what is changing. We know that with COVID, that COVID has really changed the landscape. And while we have more certainty now than we did when I came and talked to you last year, there's still a lot up in the air. We still know that special session has yet to fully land. And we know you're going to have a lot of work to do selecting 22 targeted initiatives. So part of what you will see in this presentation are kind of our base work, which is built into our community development proper budget, and a little bit of a sneak peek of what you're likely to see coming out of community development for the targeted initiatives. And just kind of as a quick reminder, I think this year you had about $3 million of the targeted initiatives that you programmed, and then there's also some additional council reserves that were programmed in the LHIA program. The one item on this framing that is new is I put supporting council initiatives, and this really stemmed out of the conversation the last time we talked about MCUB. And I think MCUB was part of this broader council strategic initiative or council initiative. So that's wrapped up here. And if you need me to change that, I'm certainly happy to moving forward. Next slide, please. Okay, so today we'll talk about the regional snapshot on the division performance that I talked about. And then the slides we're going to see is just where we get our money, how we spend the money, and again, our preview about what is coming. Next slide. Okay, so our budget objectives are the same as they were last year. Like, our job is to support Thrive MSP 2040, the housing and regional parks policy plans, and the work plan that you adopt or that you approve for us. We always work to construct a balanced budget. This year is a good news story for us. I mean, you just heard Terri talk about the additional vouchers. So all of the COVID relief bills have really put the HRA in the best financial position we've been in years. It's allowing, I'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's a good news picture right now. In a normal year, I'd be talking to you about prioritizing structural solutions and mitigating those gaps over time. The reality is for us is that the COVID relief bills have really mitigated our structural gaps right now. And then we always have just kind of the best practice of we maintain our reserve balances at council policy level. So it's not only a best practice, but you require it of us as it's a sound financial practice. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I'm going to provide a really brief kind of high level economic summary, and I followed up this summary with there's some links that you as council members or members of the public, if you want to learn more information, there's a lot of great resources out there. So, you know, what we know about 2020 is 2020 hit families in the region hard, universally hard. Over 50% of the households had earning losses in 22, and it was even more challenging if you're a community of color. The Minnesota state GDP loss at about 3.5% is about what the national average was. By the end of 2020, jobs were starting to come back, but really in the high wage employment jobs, and the lower wage employment is still under pre-pandemic levels, and that's still carrying forward into 21. So while 57% of the jobs lost to recession have been recovered, there's still a lot of people out there who are unemployed or underemployed. Now, kind of the flip side of that not even a flip side, it's an interesting dichotomy, is there's a lot of jobs that have not recovered, and yet state forecasts are very, very positive right now. You know, there's some timing things. We're going to probably really need to see what the next couple monthly forecasts look like, but we are significantly over forecast right now. What that means for us in the community development budget is really going to depend upon what comes out of session. We don't get a lot of funding from the state in our programs that is not specifically appropriated during session. Next slide, please. So you're going to see in a lot of these slides, you're going to see a lot of essentially what are news releases and tools and articles that the council staff have produced. We know that housing rent prices have just been skyrocketing and going through the roof year after year after year. In 2019 and 2019, there were epically, in the last decade, I think it was the first and second, actually I'll read the slide specifically, the first and second highest annual totals of the past decade. So the building boom really helped alleviate some of the rental crisis and was starting to stabilize the rent levels. And that's what we're seeing right now. We also are aware there's a lot of materials supply, staffing supply issues. So we're closely monitoring what that's going to look like moving forward. So on this slide, what you're going to see is just a lot of tools that US council members, that our community partners, that our residents can go look at if they're interested in exploring housing data or the Twin Cities rent trends. All of these resources are available on the council website. Next slide, please. So as I previewed before, there's been three major federal COVID relief bills. I'm sure you're all generally aware of those. How those have impacted us in the community development budget is really in the Metro HRA, and Terri talked about what that was. So those of you that sit on the Transportation Committee know that on the transit side, we get a dollar amount, and then we figure out how we're going to spend it. The Metro HRA is working differently. What they're doing is they're giving us additional vouchers. And so we get to issue those, and they're essentially making us whole for those vouchers. Or in other years, we were having to really forecast how many of the vouchers we were going to issue because we needed to be able to make sure that we were paying for all of those. What the federal government is telling us now is fully lease up. We will make you whole. So it's a little different mechanism between how the FTA is passing money through to us and how HUD is. But in the long run, this is good for the families in the region, and it really puts the council in a different position to be able to fully issue the vouchers that we have. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the slide I was alluding to before. It's a couple really good web links. So if you're looking for more detailed information on forecast, data, trends, I'll point you here. And if folks have additional questions, I'll do my best to answer. Next slide, please. All right, next slide, please. So this next section is really focusing on what we have done and what we're teeing ourselves up to do. So each individual unit will have a couple kind of highlight slides, and we're going to start with the division. I just want to acknowledge the division slide does look a little busy, but we wanted to make sure that we were really overtly calling out Thrive MSP 2040 in the areas of stewardship, prosperity, equity, livability, and sustainability. So all of the examples that you're going to see on the next series of slides are the ways that the council, with your direction and our work plan, is really helping to move Thrive MSP 2040. There are a couple initiatives that sit under the division umbrella that I wanted to highlight. And again, by recent initiatives, these are what work that we completed either in 20 or in about the first half of 21. We obviously haven't finished our 21 work plan, but that's what the recent initiatives focus on. Excuse me. So the first is the Climate Action Plan. And that is really the overarching approach that we've got to, excuse me, it's basically the larger enterprise effort that we have with climate action. You're going to see on a lot of, in some of the other units where they have very specific tools or research that they are working on for the climate action plan, but the high level umbrella for that sits under the division. The 2050 development plan, so that will be the next iteration of Thrive MSP 2040. We've been doing some advanced planning for that. We also have a lot of staff and staff work around equity that shows up in our equity change team, which has its own work plan. There's a couple design thinking cohorts, which are really focusing on equity. A lot of the COVID kind of central response and central organization has sat in division administration, and a lot of the overarching homeless work has sat in division administration. And again, all of these are areas where staff from the entire division work on them, but a lot of that central direction happens in administration. Next slide, please. So you're going to probably see more of this in 2022. So what you're looking at is kind of the history of the development guides. A lot of our work, I mean, I know the 2040, Thrive MSP 2040 doesn't feel like it was developed that long ago, and yet it is time to gear up. So there's been a lot of work happening across the council to figure out how do we most strategically set ourselves up for the 2050 development plan. So that work is going to continue in 2022, and equity change teams and equity design teams are going to continue to work to help make sure that we in community development are doing all that we can. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to transition down to each individual unit. So, I'm not going to walk through all of these slides in a great deal of detail, just because you are the ones that, the program managers and staff have been walking you through this work for the better part of the last year. So in Livable Communities, we awarded a lot of money, historic levels of money. The program is being looked at through formal program evaluation by bringing in additional stakeholders. And we've also been improving tools such as the Housing Performance Survey. In 2022, you're going to see some of the same. So the 2022 budget for Livable Communities is primarily staff. The CD budget, other than our pass-through programs, and I'll walk through this a little bit more in a couple slides, you're really paying for the staff and the staff time. So the program evaluation is going to continue on the Livable Communities grant programs. Their staff are going to be involved with the 2050 development guide and focusing on some pre-development initiatives. And there also is an LHIA pilot project, which you are likely to see in a, excuse me one second. Which you are likely to see in a 22 strategic initiative. Next slide, please. All right, so local planning, you see the local planners in nearly every single CDC meeting. They review hundreds of plans from local communities and to make sure that they are in alignment with regional planning, planning regulations. In 2022, they're going to do a lot of the same work. They're going to be working on system statements, plan reviews, analysis and reporting on land use and comprehensive planning, and working with the 2050 development guide. One of the really fun things for me with this presentation is getting to see all of the different work that the units do. And I'm just guessing that a lot of folks around the region don't know that our local planning group comes up with some really interesting and really innovative programs. A couple of those are the Solar for Vouchers program that you're going to see here, and also trying to always come up and be creative and innovative with the tools that we're providing to local communities as they do their own work. So what you're going to see in the local planning 22 budget, it's predominantly staff. That's what you're going to be seeing here. Next slide, please. Okay, so Metro HRA, I'm going to highlight just a few of the things that Terri already talked about. We serve about 7,200 low-income households and pass through in the neighborhood of $70 million a year. The HRA staff were able to do that this year in the midst of some really, really challenging circumstances. As our residents lost income, they had to do income changes. And the HRA staff basically had their workload doubled in this area while they were trying to figure out how to work remotely. They also did innovative things of how to keep our citizens safe in those houses, including moving to virtual inspections. Next slide, please. So in 2022, you're going to see a lot of the same, right? So a lot of the HRA budget is not going to be set until fall, right? So there's a couple things that we're working through in the 2022 HRA budget right now. The first is the federal money from HUD that Terri talked with you about earlier today. One of the things that we're doing right now is an analysis between which portions of that we need to bring into our 21 budget through a budget amendment, likely the Q3, and what we need to bring into the 22 budget. So I just want to give you an early heads up that a lot of this is so new that we haven't figured out the exact breakout for calendar year 21 or 22 yet. There's just a lot of variables in terms of how fast we can lease up, when the payments are going to happen. So just know that's going to change. We also know that we don't hear a lot what's going on at the federal level until sometimes later in the year. So we're going to come back and talk to you in a lot more detail after we get the fair market rent data from the federal government. So that's usually kind of a September October conversation. We started the small area fair market rent program, so we're going to be coming back with further analysis on that. And then they're also going to continue to work on the mobility demonstration program with the city of Minneapolis. Next slide, please. Okay, regional parks is another program where you're going to be investing in staff time in their work plan. They've been doing a lot of work about expanding outreach and providing more tools to citizens and to the local parks as they do their own parks planning. Some highlights for what's coming up in 22 is taking a look at the Regional Park System Historical Cultural Study, sharing information about the visitor study, and doing some additional conversations about having a broader based communication and marketing strategy amongst all the implementing agencies. So what you're going to see in the parks budget, it's people and some fairly modest consulting dollars. Next slide, please. All right, so this is just a handful of the different research tools that our research department has come up with. They provide data, they provide tools, interactives. If you haven't been out and looked at our research site, it is really amazing. Like, I just had a great time going out and pulling just the photos for you and for the citizens watching, just to see all the different tools that we have. So I'm not going to talk about this anymore, other than if you haven't been out there, I highly recommend you take a few minutes to go out and take a look at what you can pull just off the research site. Next slide, please. Okay, so in research, you're primarily paying for staff salaries, and that'll be driven by the work plan that you're going to be adopting, and some consulting dollars. So they'll be doing a lot of the research and data analysis work going into the 2015 development guide. Other items on the docket for 22 include some land use models, community profiles redesign, launching the Economic Values Atlas, taking a look at residential preference and voucher holders for the HRA, developing trends and population estimates, and doing some joint streetlight research. So the one thing to just keep in mind about research is it doesn't really matter which department you sit in community development, and for that matter, broader around the council. A lot of the work that's behind the scenes and is driving some of the database decision making you're able to do is coming out of the research department. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a slide that should look fairly familiar to you. So how we build our budget, so our 21 adopted budget is $148 million. And that includes what I would call our base budget, plus the strategic initiatives that you all approved kind of later, or towards, actually, you approved them in 21. So what we do with our base budget is we take a look at what are our federal and state requirements. And really, those are our pass-through programs. You're going to see that's essentially Metro HRA, and that is the Livable Communities Pass-Through Program. The next thing we do is we layer on negotiated contracts, and that's primarily our union, or the union contracts that drive our salaries. And then we layer on regional administrative support costs. Those are the central enterprise costs that are more efficient, run centrally. So that would be things like procurement and human resources and IS, all of the different departments that if we had to have our own, it would not be cost effective. So we leverage those central services. So when you take the base budget, what that does is it drops the division budget as a totality down by 11%. HRA programs go up 3%. That's just assuming inflation. The non-HRA programs are down 32%. Now that number looks really big, but that's really two things in that number. One is if there was dollars invested in CD, that was a strategic initiative in 21, we have pulled that out. The second major driver, and this is the biggest of the two, is our livable communities grants, our multi-year grants, and we adopt an annual budget. So what you see in the budget right now is, we have an assumption of how much revenue is going to come in, and we've matched that on expenses. What we're going to do now, between now and the public comment of the final budget, is to work with all of our subrecipients and get a clearer idea of the cash flow. So what you might see between now and later is there's money set aside in reserves to fully pay these grants. We may need to program some additional reserves. And then regional administration support is up by 5%. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the list of the initiatives that we have in development where our budget is likely to change. The first is the Metro HRA, and it's for the reasons that we just talked about. We still need to figure out how much of the federal money to program in 21 versus 22. And we also need to get a better handle on exactly how much federal money we're getting in kind of our base allocation for 22. We are also taking a look at the 2050 development guide. We know that there's going to be work, and we know that work is going to be around the enterprise. Right now, we have got some dollars and some staff time kind of earmarked for that. And as the planning work continues, there may be some additional support that we'll be looking for, probably in the terms of a consulting contract. And as that work develops and we get a better handle on exactly what that looks like, we'll make sure to bring that back to you. Livable communities is, there's a potential pilot in the works right now that would come in the pass-through budget. I don't have all of the details to share with you right now, other than to just say it's a coming attraction, and it'll be one of those targeted initiatives we talk with you about later this year. And the park side, I think we've talked a little bit about that. We really need to look at reimagining our parks future reimbursement program. There is an interpretation from our bond counsel that we received that impacts this program. So we'll be coming back to you later this year. That'll impact the capital program. And we're waiting on session to conclude to potentially impact our O&M pass-through budget and programming capital funding. So all of these items, I just wanted to get on your radar. And between now and the public comment draft, we're going to be focusing on project refinement, stakeholder conversations, including with you, and then kind of that final step would be potential adjustments to our 22 budget. Next slide, please. All right, so let's talk a little bit about where we spend our operating and pass-through dollars at the program level. So I talked about this at a high level when we were talking through each of the individual unit slides, but like always, the bulk of our budget is in Metro HRA, and that's about $86.6 million. Livable communities coming in just shy of $20 million. That includes the staffing and the pass-through. Parks at about $14 million. That includes staff time and pass-through, and it's mainly pass-through. Our RA allocation for our central service support is about $3.5 million. And then those are really our other departments of local planning, division management, and policy and research. That's really staff time and a modest amount of of consulting dollars. Next slide, please. Okay, so our revenue sources, the vast majority of our budget is federal dollars, and that is really supporting our HRA program. The next largest slice is property tax dollars, and about just shy of $19 million goes for livable communities, and the rest of that is council operations. So the council has its general purpose levy fund, and that is primarily what pays for the non-HRA portion of community development. State funding, primarily about $11 million, primarily goes for the Parks Pass-Through program. That's one of those areas where we have a plug right now, but once session concludes, we'll be able to put a harder number in there. And the remaining about $2 million of that state money goes for housing programs. On the other revenue side, on the kind of the smaller 3.3 breakout, the 2.5 is FOP, or the council-owned rental income. And then this miscellaneous $800,000 is basically some interest, and the DNR is paying for a position, and one of our FTE positions, and just a couple really small pots like that. Next slide, please. All right, so this is how your money is going to get, the council's money is going to get used. The vast majority of it gets passed through. Almost $107 million gets passed through in the form of either rental payment vouchers for our HRA families. It goes to pay the livable communities grantees that you award with your criteria, with the scoring criteria, and it goes to parks pass-through grants. That is by statute. So when you look at the pass-through account, in some areas, we have a great deal of control of how those funds get allocated, and in some programs, less so. So for the Metro HRA, there's very strict federal regulations about what happens. And when you adopt the administrative guide every year, there's some choices that are to be made there. There's a great deal of control the council has over the livable community scoring criteria, which you've very recently been through. And like I said, and then we're all the way to the parks O&M, where we really have, the only function we have there is strictly pass through. It's a very strict formula set. Our salaries and benefits are about 11.5, and that's where you're paying for our staff time and our work plan. RA allocation, again, that's our central services support. We have debt service on our parks bonds. And then the other money is so the FOP maintenance in the light blue, that's just making sure that we have good asset management of our council-owned housing. We have general administration. Those are everything from computer replacements to printing to travel to training, really just kind of those operational pieces that make a division work. And then we have contracted services, and those are areas where we have consulting work or we contract out some of our work. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talk a lot about equity when we have individual program conversations, when you're looking at scoring criteria for grant programs, or when we're looking at the HRA administrative guide. So the two columns that are in green are the outward facing money. And in some of these programs, we have a great deal of discretion, like I kind of said on the previous slide, and in others, it's pretty modest. So where we can impact equity as a council are the policy and administrative plans. It's really way high in kind of that planning process. We also work with the community choice program. We work with mainstream vouchers and project-based vouchers, all of those conversations that Terri and her team have had with you over the last couple of years. So that's about $78 million right now in 2022. We're also anticipating that about $77 million is going to be going out in grant programs this year. And that's a combination of operating and capital. So the council sets the direction in the housing and parks policy plans, in the investment strategies, in our scoring criteria for our competitive grant awards, and in how we do outreach and engagement. Now, when you take a look at the CD budget and bring it more in-house, kind of this is the staff council proper work where those dollars don't go to somebody else in a contract. We spend about $7 million a year on our annual work plan, and that's mainly staff. So that's going to be looking at strategic initiatives, investment in place strategies in the HRA, our equity change team and design teamwork, and then outreach and engagement work that we do. Now, we have a really modest contracts and consulting budget in community development. It's just not the type of expense we incur at a high amount, because so much of our work is staff driven and we do it in-house. But we do have about $2 million that we do put out for contracts and consulting work every year. We focus on getting some of our additional strategic initiatives done that way. We look at using the MCUB program. And what we really do there is we look at future projects and strategize where there might be an MCUB select procurement that we can do. We can do those for awards under $175,000, and then it's really only open to the MCUB vendors. So we don't have a huge dollar amount, but we do work with procurement and identify where we can leverage the MCUB program. And then we also work with OEO when they set DBE goals. And then we also talk with you about all of that when we walk through our different council actions and business items that we bring before you. Next slide, please. Okay, so looking ahead, we know that some things are really pretty well developed and established in our 22 budget, and there's more conversations we need to have. One, the Livable Community Pilot Program, which I mentioned. There's a whole host of HRA conversations we need to have with you. The Mobility Demonstration Project, the Home Purchase and Disposition Policy, the City of Edina Housing Partnership. That'll show up in a future budget amendment. We're going to be coming to you in the fall with HRA rent limits again, small area market rent analysis, moving to work designation. There's going to be a lot of housing conversations where we can really get into more details. In the late summer, mid to late summer, we're going to be talking to you about the capital program, particularly parks. We also are going to be able to come back to you with some more details about the 2050 Regional Development Guide planning. And I just want to note there that we're really figuring out the timing of that. So when it says note flexible timing, some of the work might be getting done in 21, some might in 22, and we've just got to figure some of those pieces out yet. And then we're going to continue to look at the CD role in supporting the MCUB program if you're looking for more details than I shared with you tonight. So I guess I'll just kind of leave with the topic, are there other topics you'd like us to add to upcoming budget conversations? Are there any questions you have about the material that I've covered tonight?
Mr. Chair, I believe your mic is up. We can't quite hear you.
I'm so sorry. Thank
There
you
you
so
go.
much for that.
You
Yep,
bet.
there we go. Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Heather. And committee members, I would just open it up if you want to answer the questions that Heather has posed, if there are other topics to add to the upcoming budget conversation, and as she says in her final slide, are there additional questions and discussion? Committee members.
This is Councilmember Chambliss.
Please, Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Chair. I really like these targeted opportunities, and and I'm looking forward to seeing kind of what kind of high-level timeline we have for these items, as well as the short descriptions of what they may look like, such as the community pilot program and the community development's role in supporting the MCUB program.
Thank you, Councilmember. Other input from council members? I will note that both council members Johnson and Wulff had to log off, so we're a smaller group now. And if council members want to weigh in, please just speak up. I can't see you.
Chair Lilligren, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen has her hand up.
Okay.
From a raised hand. I'm not sure if that was from before, but she just cleared it.
Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Chair. That was from before. I'm sorry I did not raise it again or to lower it. Thank you, Michelle, for paying attention.
No problem. I'm just kind of looking at the board, gonna make sure we got everybody.
Well, other committee members want to weigh in? Committee members. Hearing none, Heather, thanks for the work. We look forward to the ongoing conversation as we get closer to the public comment draft for the 2022 budget. And yeah, thanks for your work and for your presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Committee members, we'll move on to our third information item. It's 2020 Agricultural Preserves Report. And Jerome Benner is here to report. Mr. Benner, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for staying with me, or I guess staying with y'all. I'm happy to present the 2020 Agricultural Preserves Program. As the Chair mentioned, my name is Jerome Benner, Senior Planner in Local Planning Assistance. Next slide, please. Council members, just a brief overview of the project to get you reacclimated. The Metropolitan Agricultural Preserves Program was established in 1980 by the Minnesota legislature and has been monitored by the Met Council since 1982. This program was created to encourage the use of agricultural land, food production, and provide means for preservation of areas planned for long-term agricultural use in the 7-county metropolitan area through local and regional planning. The program, through a certification process, designates land as eligible for program enrollment. Communities are expected to plan accordingly in their local comprehensive plans and zoning ordinances. These are also mapped in the comprehensive plans. In order to be eligible for enrollment in the Agricultural Preserves Program, parcels should be 40 acres or more and remain in the program for at least 8 years. Now, there are circumstances where lesser acreages are acceptable, but these exceptions must meet specific criteria, and these criteria are set out in state statute. In 2019, the legislature introduced a new provision to the statute, providing a new early termination option for landowners. Under the new provision, landowners can at any point apply for early termination out of the program status with the local authority or the local government. The local authority needs a majority vote of its council or board to approve the request. Ag Preserve property owners receive a property tax reduction as a part of participating in this program. The credit comes from the county's conservation fund, from mortgage registrations and deed transfers, and also the state conservation and general funds. And more information about the program funding is included later in this presentation. Enrollment includes the landowner applying for the program, providing personal information, and an affidavit from the authority certifying the parcel for long-term agricultural use, and the local authority certifying eligible lands by resolution. Next slide, please. Thank you. This figure, not in the report, shows the total acreage, shows the total acres enrolled in the program in the Twin Cities metro area. After 2000, enrollment dropped until 2009, which was the lowest in the program history at 179,898 acres, and is consistent with the market recession at that time. Then enrollment started to pick up after the market rebound, where many landowners enrolled their land into the program. After 2009, enrollment was an upward trend until 2013. Since then, however, there has been a slight decline in the program. In 2020, the program enrollment, which is 198,000, just over 198,000 acres, reached its lowest number of acres enrolled since 2011, which was just over 195,000 acres. This reflects only just a 2% decrease. And even with acres falling out of the program in recent years, the program has remained relatively steady over the past 20 years, only decreasing by 1% overall since the start of the program. Next slide, please. Thank you. Figure 1 of the report illustrates the breakdown of acres by county from 2000 to 2020. Carver County, shown here in orange, accounts for half the acres enrolled in the region, with just over 101,000, followed by Dakota County in dark blue with just over 70,000. All counties experienced a decline in enrolled acres from the previous year, except for Dakota County, which just increased by 750 acres. Council, I just want to point out you may not be seeing Ramsey County on this list because they are mostly a fully developed community. So it's just for the 6 counties that have property owners enrolled into the program. Next slide, please. Council members, here is a map of where acres are mostly located, where all acres are located within the region. As you can see, Carver County, Carver and Dakota have the most acreage, with others kind of peppered out through the region. As figure As shown in figure 2 of the report, as I mentioned, these are the parcels shown on this map in green. This data is compiled from the counties, Minnesota Department of Revenue, and the legislature provided to local jurisdictions by the council. Next slide, please. The program, a little bit about the funding. The program is funded by a $5 fee collected by counties on mortgage registrations, deed transfers, as mentioned earlier in the report. Counties retain half of this in the County Conservation Fund, and send the other half divided equally between Minnesota Conservation Fund and the State General Fund. If the amount in the County Conservation Fund is not sufficient to reimburse the jurisdictions, counties get money from the County Conservation Fund. If that fund is not sufficient either, then the money is drawn from the State General Fund. In Carver County, for example, where there's just $20,000 paid over to county fund participants for nearly 104,000 acres, the county had to draw around $198,000 from the State Conservation Fund and the State General Fund to supplement the remainder of the reimbursement. Only Carver and Dakota counties had to draw upon additional funds from the state to reimburse their participants. These two counties also have the highest number of acres enrolled into the program. Next slide, please. And with that, council members, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Benner, for your report and for all of your work on this. And committee members, questions for Mr. Benner on his report?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for this great presentation. I'm wondering if Ramsey County has historically not had an applicant, or is it the issue the lack of space? Thank you.
Mr. Benner.
Mr. Chair, council members, Councilmember Lee, that is a great question. As far as I know, in the past, I'd say at least 10 to 15 years, if not longer, I am not terribly familiar with Ramsey County being enrolled into the project, or excuse me, into the program. I can only assume that it's mostly due to Ramsey County being mostly a built-out community. I do want to mention that there are some agricultural uses within the region, such as the University of Minnesota City of St. Paul campus, I believe, has a number of agricultural uses as a part of their research. But as far as anyone being enrolled into the program or other property owners, I'm not terribly familiar. Perhaps Director Barajas can shed some light on if there was ever a time that Ramsey County was enrolled into the program.
Thanks. Director Barajas, anything to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, Jerome's got it right. Mostly developed county and hasn't had a large agricultural use. It's scattered throughout, certainly, but not in the way that you see in counties like Carver County or Dakota County.
Thank you. Councilmember Lee, any further questions?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Committee members, further questions for Mr. Benner on his report?
Mr. Chair, it's Councilmember Lindstrom.
Yeah, please, Councilmember Lindstrom.
I was just wondering, if you were looking into your crystal ball, would you anticipate that line continuing a downward trend in the years ahead?
Mr. Benner.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lindstrom, Councilmember, thank you for your question. That seems to be the trend, and if I were a betting man, I would continue to say that could be the case. But it's really difficult to tell. With the recent addition of the provision from 2019, that allows property owners to expire out of the program sooner by local authority, we may start to see some of that again in the region, but it's pretty difficult to tell at this point.
You may have mentioned this, but what was the reason for the big upward spike? I know it was like 2010, 2011. Obviously, the economy was kind of coming back up. Was that the main reason? That was a really significant upward spike. Was there like a policy change or something that drove that?
Council members, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lindstrom, I believe that it does correspond most directly to the aftermarket recession. Property owners may have seen an increase and the value of participating to receive the tax benefit. But aside from that, that's kind of where my knowledge stops there. But
Thank you.
sure.
Thank you, Councilmember Mr. Benner. Any further questions for Mr. Benner on his report? Any further questions? Seeing none, again, my thanks, Mr. Benner, for being here tonight and for all of your work on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Council members, we have one final information item. I might turn to you or maybe Director Baraha. She did indicate earlier today in an email that that one or two of these later reports could be deferred. So I guess I would just kind of maybe either turn to the director or to my fellow committee members. Do you want to keep going and get through the last report? Or I think Ms. Smiley's still here. I can't see anyone who's participating. So I think Ms. Smiley's still here. And I thank her for
I am,
hanging
Mr.
in.
Chair.
Great.
Councilmember Atlas Engelbretson, I'm just curious if we have, I'm not sure if I'm seeing everybody either. I'm just curious if we still have quorum, if that matters.
And I guess
I
I
think
would
we do.
Michelle.
And since there's no votes, a quorum is not an issue right now, but it's a good question.
I'm just wondering more for the spirit of having our colleagues hear this information and participate. That would be my one wonderment, Chair, is if we desire that.
Agree. Any other committee members want to weigh in, or?
I'm seeing 7 committee members still in attendance.
Oh, okay. Oh.
Either way, it's fine with me, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Barajas, do you have any guidance here? I'm fine going forward as well. I just want to make sure that others. I didn't realize we had 7 committee members still here, so I'm
Actually, we have 8. I miscounted. We have 8.
Wow. All right.
And Mr.
Director
Chair, while
Barajas.
it's not time sensitive, but it also isn't a long presentation either. About the same as the egg preserves.
Great. Thanks. I think again, I didn't. All right. I can actually see your thumb, so I'm assuming that's Councilmember Atlas Engelbretson, but I can't see your name. All right. So let's.
Councilmember Cummings had her hand up too.
Councilmember Cummings.
I would be in favor of continuing it,
Cool.
continuing tonight. I think it's there are enough of us here, and our agendas all get so full that continuing it. So out of respect for Raya and staff who have prepared for this evening, I would prefer to continue, but I have to go either way.
Yep. Nope. Let's continue. I did not realize there were so many of us here. So, so let's continue. And the flow of our committee's work is there's more work as the year goes on. So we've been enjoying some sort of lighter agenda. So you're right, Molly. They're going to get fuller and fuller. So let's continue on. Our final information item is the 2020 plat monitoring report. And Raya Smalley is here to present. Welcome, Ms. Smalley.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, council members. You can hear me all right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. I'll try to keep it as brief and to the point as possible. So my name is Raya Smiley. I'm a senior planner in the local planning assistance, and I'm here today to present to you the 2020 plat monitoring program report. Next slide, please. So I would like to, again, start with a big picture. We always do that every year just to, because this is a once a year kind of a program. So we have the long range planning in the heart of our planning for future land uses to accommodate population growth. We have the decennial update, which you have been reviewing two of them, I think, tonight. And then amendments to them. The plans provide for the basis for land use inventory with existing land uses. We also receive information on building permits, as you can see here, annually from all communities. Then this data is complemented by the Agricultural Preserves Program, which you just heard from my colleague, Jerome.
And that identifies the areas that are protected from development. And then there's plat monitoring, which is basically a program that tries to capture what will develop in the near future. So this is a stage before the building permits, and that's why it's basically a credit program. We try to capture what's going on in the market before it actually is realized into development. Next slide, please. The program started in 2001 with 12 volunteer communities who started reporting from year 2000. It was the program was established with the input from Association of Metropolitan Municipalities, which is known as Metro Cities now, and the Builders Association of the Twin Cities, which is Housing First at the moment. All the names have changed. Again, the purpose of the program is to monitor annual residential, sewered residential developments. So that includes the number of acres, the number of units platted, the mix of single family and multifamily housing, what type of land consumption each of these plats are bringing forward, and the average net residential density. So this program gives the council the ability to assess the available land supply in the participating communities and then monitor the density of new development. So that is kind of compared with the council density policy of a minimum of average of 3 units per net developable acre. So that is most of the developing edge communities have that kind of a requirement to meet. Every year, communities are asked to, the ones that are participating are asked to provide that information from the previous year with a copy of the plat. And then we calculate based on all that information what the net density of developments have been in that year, and then kind of keeping track of the program since the 2000 basically. So we have like a more of a holistic view of what's going on. So the program is not only used for monitoring, but the communities receive a credit. So it gives them a bit of a flexibility in responding to market demands when they're planning for lower density developments. So it's a crucial tool in implementing in reviewing the comprehensive plan updates, amendments, and sewer permits. So basically, it kind of helps bring up the overall density of development in a community, making giving them the credit for what's going on before the permit is issued. And I think and then every community, even though they have joined in at different times since 2001, all of them are encouraged to report back as far as 2000. Regardless of when they joined. Next slide, please. So we currently have 45 communities in the plat monitoring program. Those are the ones that you can see in this map with blue. The first 12 volunteer communities were the cities of Blaine, Chanhassen, Eden Prairie, Hugo, Invergrove Heights, Lakeville, Maple Grove, Ramsey, Savage, Shakopee, Waconia, and Woodbury. So the 45 communities includes 44 cities and the 1 township of Empire Township. Next slide, please. So kind of having the previous map in mind, the participating communities designation in Thrive MSP 2040 includes suburban edge, it includes suburban edge, emerging suburban edge, and rural center. Next slide, please. So this graph is the figure 4 from the staff report. It kind of shows the mix of single family and multifamily housing throughout the life of the program. So it goes back all the way to 2000. So even though it is kind of going up and down, overall there's an relatively equal number of single family and multifamily housing platted. About 54% of the units platted have been single family and 46% have been multifamily. In 2020, communities reported a total of 122 plats. So they platted just above 3,900 single-family units and about 3,100 multifamily units. So that's, again, relatively average throughout the program. In 2003, as you can see in the chart, that was the highest number of units platted. That was 10,000 units. Then the number gradually dropped to the lowest in 2009 when like a total of 286 units were platted in that year. That is generally consistent with the development proposals that was during the market crash. So there was not much activity going on in the development world. And since then, platting activity has been gradually increasing, even though it may have a little bit of a up and down every year, but overall it's kind of increasing again. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is figure 7 from the report. It shows the actual units platted, which is the green bars. And then it also, the lines show the range of units that are allowed to be developed. So that's based on the minimum and maximum allowable density of the land uses that these these units are being platted in. So basically, the minimum and maximum of that line shows if the 122 plats were subdivided at the lowest or highest density defined, that's where the line would have ended up. In 2020, the lowest allowable units was 5,244, and the highest allowable units was 10,712. With a total of just above 6,800 units actually platted in 2020, which is below the midpoint of just above 8,000 units. So as you can see, this is about the average of where communities have been platting recently, around the midpoint, but a little closer to the bottom of the range, which kind of shows the demand for lower densities in the market for at least for the communities who are participating in the program. Next slide, please. So throughout the years, communities have recorded a variety of densities for development. In some cases, no plats. So for each community, considering each community, sometimes they haven't recorded any plats. But here, this is, I want to emphasize the green line that's above on the upper part of the chart that shows the overall net density in these platting communities since 2000. Except for year 2009, communities have always platted at above the 3 units per acre of net dwelling units per acre. That's the council policy. The only year that it fell below was 2009, which again is aligned with what was going on with development and the market in that time. So in 2020, the overall net density of development for the participating communities was 4.1, which is almost exactly similar to what it was in 2019. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, the council calculates the net density by taking out what's considered undevelopable. So we ask communities to report to us gross acreage of the plats, and then also additional information about the plats, which includes wetlands and water bodies, public parks and open space, any arterial road right-of-way, and any land that is set aside for future development. So all of these, and that's marked as other, by the way. So communities are encouraged to take the most advantage of land for development with private lots and local streets. So we don't take local streets out because that's basically the design of the plat. So this chart basically shows the where those land utilization is happening in each of these areas. The highest net residential acres was again in 2003 and then in 2000, right in the beginning. You can kind of see that while less net residential land, and that's the, I don't know, it's like a brownish color, has been platted compared to those peak years overall, like in the most recent years. More land has been also set aside for future development, and that's the pink line. So, and this information is also used in population forecast modeling. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is figure 10 of the staff report. It kind of shows, or at least tries to show, I know it's very small because there's so much happening in here. It shows the overall plating activity around the region in the participating communities. And these are areas, as I mentioned, sewered residential development. So these are areas that are within MUSA and on the developing edge of the region. So that's where most of the activity has been happening. Next slide, please. Starting last year, we added a new section to the report. We started analyzing the amount of time that it takes from platting a site to that site being issued a development permit. So this amount of time is also known as lot absorption. It shows the availability of platted lots and the community's capacity to issue development permits if the demand is there. The longer the lot absorption, the more platted land is readily available, oh my God, for permitting and development. Shorter lot absorption shows a stronger demand and a rapid growth in the area. And tracking this information helps us inform us with growth patterns, land capacity, forecasting, and again, permitting process. So we use the permit information that the research department in the community development division collects annually and combine that with the platting information. Since the geocoded permit data, for now at least, go back as far as 2009, the analysis only includes this past 11 years of permits, basically. It has taken between 0 and 19 years for the plats in all of the counties to receive development permits. And 0 signifies that the plat received development permit the same year that it was platted. Between all the program participants, there's a wide range of duration from an average of 0, that's Belle Plaine for 2020, and then, for overall, to 9 years, which is Orono. Overall, participating communities have experienced an average of about 3 years for the platted lots to receive building permits and for any permits that were issued between 2009 and 2020. There's a wide range of lot absorption between communities, but as it is shown in this chart, almost 60% of the plats have received development permits in less than 2 years, with 10% of them within the same year, which, as I mentioned, signifies that plat and permit happened in the same year, and 1/3 of the plats in 1 year. Even though the number, the 19 years sounds very large, but only 4% of the plats had a time period of longer than 10 years. These results basically restate the overall conclusion of a strong market demand in the developing suburbs of the metro area. Next slide, please. Thank you. On this slide, the chart on the left is also in your staff report, shows the average time that it takes for a plat to be realized as a permit by community designation. The time was the shortest in rural residential with 0 years, but with relatively less platting and permitting activity, that is based on only 1 or 2 plats. So it doesn't necessarily say that that's happening the fastest there. Most of the activity has in fact occurred in suburban edge and emerging suburban edge communities. The time between platting and permitting was 2.8 years in suburban edge and 3.5 years in emerging suburban edge areas. The chart on the right, again, also in the staff report, shows the average time based on the type of development permit that was issued. As shown here, accessory dwelling units and duplex, triplex, and quad have experienced the shortest amount of time between platting and permitting, with 1 and 2 years respectively. But there was only 1 accessory dwelling unit permit that was captured in the data. Townhomes, which are single family attached, have taken the most amount of time with an average of 3.7 years, while single family, which in fact is the majority of the plats permitted, has taken an average of 2.9 years, which is again close to that 3-year average that I was mentioning. Next slide, please. In your staff report, there's also a summary of density by community that you can refer to and see how the planning activity has changed over time. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions you may have. And sorry, I kind of ran through the presentation.
No, thanks, Mrs. Smiley. That was very, very good, very interesting. Committee members, questions on that report? Any questions? And again, please just speak up.
Not a question, but a comment by Chambliss.
Yes. Thanks, Councilmember Chambliss, please.
I'm telling you, after this 4-year term, I have learned so much about development that I never thought I would learn. So I really appreciate the staff taking the time to get so detailed. I consider that a compliment that you would share all of that with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember, and I agree wholeheartedly. Further comments or questions on that report? On the plat report?
Councilmember Vento has her hand up.
Thank you, Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to second Councilmember Chambliss's applause. This is really great, Raya. I have probably a difficult question to even consider, but is there any way of anticipating now what these numbers will look like a year from now for 2021? And do you have any reason to believe they're going to possibly decrease as a result of COVID?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Vento, that is a very interesting question. I can only speculate about what's going to happen, and part of my answer also has to do with our knowledge in talking with local communities these days. I should say that to my own surprise, the development activity has not necessarily decreased during COVID. So based on that, I don't necessarily anticipate that 2021 numbers will be impacted by COVID. In fact, we're hearing from a lot of the communities, local communities that we're in contact with, that there's a lot happening in terms of development, and they're super busy. So we're actually, I'm personally excited to see what these numbers show next year. So I guess that's as much as I can speculate.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember. Further questions or comments on the plat report? Any further questions? Hearing none, again, Mrs. Smiley, thank you so much for the report and for the work.
Thank you.
I just really want to second what Councilmember Chambliss said. It's just, this is such an education. Every committee meeting is an education. Thank you.
Thank you.
And committee members, seeing no further business before this committee, we are adjourned. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good week.
Thank you, Chair.
You too.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.